Heartroom friends. We're at the tail end of Little House in the Big Woods. If you've been following along, we're on page 227. It's our last chapter, almost our last chapter. At noon, the threshers came into the table loaded with food, but there was none too much, for threshers work hard and get very hungry. By the middle of the afternoon, the machines had finished all the threshing, and the men who owned them drove them away into the big woods, taking with them the sacks of wheat that were their pay. They were going to the next place where neighbors had stacked their wheat and wanted the machines to thresh it. Pa was very tired that night, but he was happy. He said to Ma, "It would have taken Henry and Peterson and Pa and me a couple of weeks apiece to thresh as much grain with flails as that machine threshed today." So it would have taken them a couple of weeks. That's 14 days, what it took one day for the machine to do. We wouldn't have got much wheat either, and it wouldn't have been as clean. "That machine's a great invention," he said. "Other folks can stick to old-fashioned ways if they want to, but I'm all in for progress. It's a great age we're living in. As long as I raise wheat, I'm going to have a machine come and thresh it, if there's one anywhere in the neighborhood." He was too tired that night to talk to Laura, but Laura was proud of him. It was Pa who had got the other men to stack their wheat together and send for the threshing machine, and it was a wonderful machine. Everybody was glad that it had come. We're on our last chapter called The Deer in the Wood. The Deer in the Wood. The grass was dry and withered, and the cows must be taken out of the woods and kept in the barn to be fed. All the bright-colored leaves came dull brown when the cold rains began. There was no more playing under the trees, but Pa was in the house when it rained, and he began again to play the fiddle after supper. Then the rains stopped. The weather grew colder. In the early mornings, everything sparkled with frost. The days were growing short, and a little fire burned all day in the cook stove to keep the house warm. Winter was not far away. The attic and the cellar were full of good things once more, and Laura and Mary had started to make patchwork quilts. Everything was beginning to be snug and cozy again. One night when he came in from doing the chores, Pa said that after supper he would go to his deer lick and watch for a deer. There had been no fresh meat in the little house since spring, but now the fawns were growing up, and Pa would go hunting again. Pa had made a deer lick in an open place in the woods with trees nearby in which he could sit and watch. A deer lick was a place where the deer came to get salt. When they found a salty place in the ground, they came there to lick it, and that was called a deer lick. Pa had made one by sprinkling salt over the ground. After supper, Pa took his gun and went into the woods, and Laura and Mary went to sleep without any stories or music. As soon as they woke in the morning, they ran to the window, but there was no deer hanging in the trees. Pa had never before gone out to get a deer and come back home without one. Laura and Mary did not know what to think. All day, Pa was busy banking the little house and the barn with dead leaves and straw held down by stones to keep out the cold. The weather grew colder all day. Do you do that? Do you stack leaves and straw next to your house to keep the cold out? Look at Pa. He built his own home, and it's a log home he cut from trees. And in between the logs is what we call the chink, right? They can sometimes put sap mixed with dirt or mud in between these logs, depending on where you live. You might use different things. So Pa does have things between the logs, but it's not perfect, and cold air comes in. Sometimes it comes in under the house, and sometimes it comes in between the logs. So he's piling up these leaves and straw around the house. He's putting rocks on them so the leaves and straw don't blow away, and he's hoping that that keeps the house a little bit warmer this winter time. Let's see what happens. The weather grew colder all day, and that night there was once more a fire on the hearth, and the windows were shut tight and chinked for the winter. After supper, Pa took Laura on his knee, while Mary sat close in her little chair, and Pa said, "Now I'll tell you why you had no fresh meat to eat today. When I went out to the deer lick, I climbed up into a big oak tree. I found a place on a branch where I was comfortable and I could watch the deer lick. I was near enough to shoot any animal that came to it, and my gun was loaded and ready on my knee. There I sat and waited for the moon to rise and light the clearing. I was a little tired from chopping wood all day yesterday, and I must have fallen asleep, for I found myself opening my eyes. The big round moon was just rising. I could see it between the bare branches of the trees low in the sky, and right against it I saw a deer standing. His head was up and he was listening. His great branching horns stood out above his head. He was dark against the moon. It was a perfect shot. But he was so beautiful. He looked so strong and free and wild that I couldn't kill him. I sat there and looked at him until he bounded away into the dark woods. Then I remembered that Ma and my little girls were waiting for me to bring home some good fresh venison. I made up my mind the next time that I would shoot. I'm going to stop there. Tomorrow we'll read the last of the last chapter.